Hello out there, Pushback Talks listeners. Producer Kirsten here to welcome you back and set the stage for Season 7. It's been an eventful summer for the Pushback Talks crew and around the world. Fredrik has been traveling the globe promoting his latest project, Breaking Social, while Leilani has been hard at work with The Shift, getting mayors from some of the biggest cities across Canada to change their approach to homelessness, and securing a better resource base for The Shift so we can dedicate our time and energy to the projects we believe will have the most impact. On the global front, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights recently acknowledged the depth of the crises the world is facing, stressing that human rights-based economies are vital to long-lasting solutions and that states have obligations to fulfill human rights. The discussion around student housing has also been heating up in many countries, resulting in protests and renewed conversations about the financialization of housing as university students head back to class. The push for more action to mitigate climate change was also at the top of everyone's minds, as climate scientists believe this July was possibly the hottest month in the past 120,000 years, and definitely the hottest month since weather records began in the 19th century. We'll be exploring these topics and more this season, so stay tuned. But first, let's catch up with Fredrik and Leilani after a long summer away.
I'm Fredrik Gerten, and I'm the filmmaker.
And I'm Leilani Farha, and I'm the advocate.
Oh, that's who we are. That's now we have the labels on and the hats are on, then we can go. And this is what I understand, season number 7. We have done, I think, like almost 90 episodes. And this little pandemic project is still cooking on.
And I meet people every month who say they love the podcast.
I also do that. It's kind of always surprised me. What the fuck are you listening to? To the podcast?
Same. Wow.
I mean, we know that we have over 90,000 downloads and we have audience in 158 countries. Which is
amazing.
Still very cool.
Yeah.
I won't say that it's enormous. It could fill a stadium, but it's not many stadiums. So how are you? We never meet.
No, let's start with you.
Okay, how am I?
How are you? You have been so busy. I've been watching from afar on Instagram, and your film is flying. Tell us. Where has it been showing?
It's on cinemas in Sweden, and we are now into week 6, so it's been intense.
Amazing.
And I meet a lot of audience, and the film does well. We are heading towards the 9,000 in the cinemas, which is a lot of people. That's almost
amazing.
A small stadium.
Yeah. Tell our listeners a little bit what your film is about, Breaking Social.
Now you have to tell that story. I hate to talk about the film. You have to. What is it about, Leilani?
Well, it's about corruption. Let's say that. It's about how the social contract is broken. People are doing what they believe they should do. They go to school, they get a job, even a good job, and yet somehow they're always behind. They can't get ahead. And yet there are other people with billions and billions and billions of dollars, and they are getting ahead. And it seems that it's at the expense of everyday people.
The rigged game.
And so you're exposing it. It's a rigged game. And you expose it in the film, but really, what is the film about? What is it really about? Hope, maybe, that people are pushing back.
Yeah, and that we can push back. And that's actually been a very nice experience, because when you do a film, you don't really know the balance of things. And
right.
Of course, it is very much about the pattern of corruption and the pattern of kleptocracy and extractivism, which is very close to what we talk about in Push.
Yes.
But it's also... So it's one way a journey into the dark, but it's also a journey into the light, where we get to understand that we as humans, we are born to cooperate, that survival of the fittest actually means survival of the friendliest. And I follow people around the globe who are fighting back. And so there's a lot of inspiration. And now when I'm meeting a lot of audiences around in Sweden, it's many people come up to me and in the Q&A say, hey, I think I need to be active. What can I do?
Amazing.
We've had a lot of people coming, women coming from something called rebel moms, mothers of rebellion. That is now a fast-growing movement. Actually started here in Malmö. That are now in all continents. Mothers of Rebellion. Check them out.
I'm going to check them out. I am a mother, and I believe I'm a mother of rebellion. So I'm going to check them out.
And it's like peaceful actions, but they're of course very much in support of the Greta generation, of the young climate activists. So, but also a lot of others. And I have had panels with unions, political parties, with Greenpeace, with. I had an Iranian journalist, and she said,
wow.
"Oh, whatever I see in this film also happens in Iran." So, it's very cool to meet the audience. I really like it. And after this, I'm going out in the world. So, next step is actually your country, Canada. So, I will be in Montreal the 10th of October, and then I will be in Toronto the 11th and 12th of October. So that will be in Toronto, will be in the Bloor Cinema.
Fantastic.
So you are all welcome. And from then on, I go to Mexico.
Nice.
And then after that, I go straight to the German release of the film. And after that, we will be in the Netherlands, and on and on. So it's exciting. It's very intense. But I like it, so I shouldn't complain. I like to be engaged in, and the luxury of my job, maybe also in yours, that I meet a lot of inspirational people, and then you get energy of people who are doing stuff.
Yeah.
Instead of being, because that's also one of the messages in the film, is that cynicism and hopelessness is like. It's like almost like the fascist best friends, the super rich best friends, or if you get cynical and don't think anything is possible. So to be hopeful is also an act of resistance. And I think that's what we're also doing here in this podcast, and you do with your work, Leilani, is to create hope, and to create, the feeling, the sense that things actually can change. And I think that's really cool. But I read you had a big op-ed in The Guardian.
I did.
You do things like that. That's really cool. I have a friend who's writing op-eds in The Guardian. I've never done that. I think it's really, really cool. And
It's good.
And the headline is very, very cool also. Student housing used to be affordable. Why has it become an asset class to enrich the already wealthy? That's the headline.
That's the headline.
That's a very straightforward question. How could student homes go from affordable to be a really cool asset for the investors? So tell me more.
Well, it's really because of students' parents. The investors have figured out that behind a lot of students are wealthy parents, and that they can take over student housing or build new student housing and charge exorbitant rents. And there are parents that will pay this. And part of this issue is related to the underfunding of universities. And the way it works is, so universities often used to get public funds. They don't get public funds anymore, or not as many. And so what do? They increase enrollment. So they increase the number of students going to the universities, which then puts pressure on the available housing. And two, they outsource housing to these investors, and it's private equity firms that are really engaged in student housing. And we did a podcast in our very early days on this issue, and it's only gotten worse. So we have student protests all around the world. I can afford the tuition, but I can't afford to live in the city where the university is. Students living in cars, living in homeless shelters, I saw this in Dublin, for example, very overcrowded accommodation, like 12 people in a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment with 1 bathroom.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's in Europe.
Yeah.
I mean, it's,
Lots of protests in Europe around this.
Sweden is not that fucked, but still,
Yet.
I read it actually in the newspaper today here locally in Malmo that there was student from Stockholm coming to work, study in Malmo. He slept the first 3 nights in a central station.
Wow. Yeah.
So it is really hard. And the mayor was interviewed in the newspaper, and she said, we really want to be a great student city, but it's very hard.
Yes.
And the thing is, they're trying different options for the city to build more student housing, so they actually become the owners.
Right.
But then the legislation has now been turned by the neoliberals, turned into that the city-owned housing company has to operate under the market rules.
Wow.
Which then makes it much harder for the city
Yeah.
to create affordable.
Yeah.
I mean, they can still build student housing, but it becomes quite expensive.
Right.
And of course, then the student loans also are not following, the needs.
Of course. No.
So it's getting really tough.
Yeah.
Also here, and now they are trying to find solutions, but also here we can see that foreign investors coming in and building this kind of big blocks of extremely small apartments.
Well, this is it. Exactly. It's a big problem in Canada as well. I happened to have sent both of my kids off to university for the first time this year in September.
Congrats.
And so, of course, I had to become very acquainted with accommodation. And for first-year students, it's okay. You can get into a residence. It's expensive, but it's not outrageously expensive. It's expensive. But they're already now, it's only September, they're having to figure out where are they going to live next September. And that's when it becomes almost impossible. And I have a friend whose daughter lives in one of these financialized buildings. She has a teeny little unit with 2 other friends. They each have their own teeny little bedroom and one very small common space. And they're each paying, I think, close to $900 each for their little room per month. It's a lot.
I think that's almost the worst thing that happens now. I actually tell you, I was in Stockholm and I stayed at a hotel to show my film. And suddenly the hotel rooms were expensive. So I got a room that it said floor 3.
Right.
But then when I went into the elevator, it went down. Oh. So it was actually a room in the basement.
Oh, my.
Probably former garage. So there was no windows and it was like so small, so tiny. And I mean, that could have been fine if the price would have been, really
Super cheap.
But it was 200 euros,
Oh my gosh. No windows?
And no windows. And this is normal, she said in the hotel. This is,
Wow.
And the upgrade costed 20 euros, but of course there was nothing to get. But I mean,
Wow.
So this is the new reality.
Yeah.
They are producing more and more unlivable places, but the price is the same.
Exactly. If not more expensive. Yeah.
And that's even more provocative because I mean, if the students you're mentioning here are 3 in an extremely small space, but if it costed, $100 a month or $200, it would maybe be acceptable. Yeah,
absolutely, exactly. And you can just see that it's just a money grab. That's what's so offensive. Like I visited that residence, and it was fine. It was clean. It was fine, but nothing was done well. It wasn't. It's not a well built building. I'm not sure how green that building is. It certainly wasn't made from timber, so it's not the greenest building.
No.
You just think, wow, this is just a money grab. You can just see it. That's what this is about, maximizing profits.
And we also know, Leilani, that these people, the Blackstone and their copy and paste friends out there,
Yes.
they don't intend to stay in business.
No.
So they're in as long as the asset class is growing, and then they are out.
That's right.
So, which means that they're leaving on the market, overpriced buildings where the quality will fall quite soon, and it will be even crappier.
Yeah.
And still very expensive because somebody then bought this building to a too high price.
Yeah. One thing, Fredrik, when you come to Canada with Breaking Social, you'll notice the conversations will be very much about housing. So your two films will collide. This often happens to you. Maybe also Bikes versus Cars will come in too. But the conversation in Canada right now is very much about housing. It's a very divided, not very optimistic, hopeful conversation. It's really been getting me down. I'll be honest to say that. There's real divides, even within the advocate groups. People really divided about what the solutions are and how to move forward and what to do about private actors. Some people kind of want to just turn away and just ignore them and pretend they don't exist. Let them continue to do what they do. And government should just intervene and do what governments can do, but just let the private actors free. And then there's people like me who say, no, we have to stop the private actors from doing what they're doing, and governments have to do more.
Yeah.
So it's quite a divided conversation here in Canada. I'll be interested to know your, zoomed out opinion once you get here and you hear what people are talking
I'm really
about.
looking forward because first of all, I really want to dedicate the screenings of my film in Canada to the activists.
Nice.
I want them to come and I want to celebrate people who do something, because that's really the first step everybody has to take, is to love people who are doing something.
Yeah.
Love the activists. That's why I love you.
Thanks.
So that's the first, and then the next step is, of course, to do something and to gather knowledge. And you're also an extremely good source of knowledge. And then you also have the power to put pressure on the national and the local governments, which is really important. I can see that you are attacking them almost all the time. So do they love you, or?
There is a way to attack, as you say. I would just say critique, or provide an alternative vision to governments and still have them like you well enough. I'll never be, I'm not mainstream enough to be fully embraced by any government, which I suppose is the feather in my cap. I think that's good. But the white boys tend to get more attention from governments, at least my government in Canada.
But you don't want to be a white boy, do you?
No, impossible.
That's also very hard for you to be a white boy.
Exactly. But I like to be able to critique and still be friendly with government, and I've managed that. I'm a nice enough person, and I like to have good conversations, and I think a lot of government people do.
What are you telling the Canadian government in regards to student housing?
Well, I haven't been focusing only on student housing.
Okay.
It's a larger conversation.
In the larger.
I'm telling governments actually that there are things that they could be doing immediately besides building. I'm not saying don't build. Of course, we do need new buildings, new construction that's green and that's deeply affordable social housing. That's what we need. So if you're going to build, be very strategic and build for who is absolutely in need. But there's other things that can be done. We know, for example, that there are a lot of vacant units, underused properties, underused lands that could be used to start solving this housing crisis. Rather than always build, we should also be saying, what about the Airbnb units that are only used 66 days in a year? What about, we have in my city, for example, a vacant home tax. And through that tax, we discovered that there were more vacant homes than originally anticipated. So what is government doing to encourage owners to put those units on for rent at reasonable prices?
Why are people keeping homes empty?
Why?
Tell me.
Well, there's lots of reasons. We have discovered that many actual landlords would prefer to keep units empty than lower rents. which is very interesting because they know over time, eventually the market will kick in again in their favor and they can rent at the price that they want. So it's a lot of, that's what we call speculation. That's land banking. It's asset banking, you know, just sitting on an asset. So that's one reason. Another reason is maybe it seems like more of a hassle to rent than to just leave it vacant, which, you know, is understandable. But one of the things, Fredrik, I'm having a really hard time doing in my work is we can have all these policy conversations, housing solutions, and be optimistic, et cetera. It's harder for me to engage governments in a way where they understand I'm actually on legal terrain. I'm talking about a human right that governments have made real legal commitments to. And they don't always want to have that conversation. That's why they like talking to other people, the bros, as I call them these days, because they don't bring up their legal obligations and the accountability of governments to people. And that's where we really need to be very clear. And that's what I love about the activists, right? The ones who are on the streets, in the trenches, they're saying specifically to governments and to the private sector, you have a responsibility to us and we're holding you accountable. It's even if they don't use human rights language, it's the same idea, right? Accountability.
Yeah. And I think since we started to, with Push and started to talk around the world, the language has changed a lot with the activists and also a lot of politicians. So your language is now out there. People know that housing is a human right. But politicians are very much kind of almost like hostages in a system that is hard to change.
Yeah.
Also because these huge lobby investments.
Absolutely.
So they're up against somebody who's telling the world that the solution is in the private sector, in the investors and what they call development.
Yeah.
So it's hard for politicians to go against that. And that's my new film is very much talking about that also. If we want to go up against storytelling created by the wealthiest strategic communication people, you need a very good language from your side and from our side, but you also need movements. You need real political pressure. If you can create that, you will actually help politicians to do things.
That's right.
So the politicians, the elected people need you to be active and to shout and to communicate that we can't have it like this anymore. And it's obvious in Canada, everybody's talking about that. So it's like this frustration that is so widespread in Canada and the US and Sweden or in UK or wherever we are in the world. Also in the South, we know that. It's like we are becoming the silent majority, We all know that this is fucked, this is wrong, but we don't speak out in one voice as we would need to do to be able to change something. So how do we get there, Leilani?
I think what you said is absolutely right. It's the movements and the people on the ground that are going to make the real difference for sure. Part of the problem is, you'll remember when we interviewed Peter S. Goodman for this show, the author of Davos Man and a New York Times economic correspondent. His book, Davos Man, is just so brilliant. And you'll recall...
He's also in my film.
He is in your film, that's right. And he's great in your film too. And you'll recall, one of the central ideas he puts forward in that book is that these investors and the financial industry will put themselves forward as the solution to the problems that they've created. And that's very much the case here in Canada, but of course that's everywhere now with respect to housing. So it's very difficult to get governments to understand that these friends of theirs are actually the enemy and are actually causing the stress in society, causing so much of the social upheaval in society, trying to get governments to understand exactly what you said, Fredrik. That's one of the things I keep saying to governments is human rights is actually a tool. It will make, and I get this line from you, it'll make happier societies. If you just implement human rights, you will have more equal, more peaceful, more beautiful cities and countries. That I take from you. That's your line, but I really believe that. And
I think we should reuse everything that I don't remember who said what. I steal a lot from you. Don't be, just go on.
It's good.
It's good.
It's good. But just to say to governments that, because they always feel that human rights is like this whip. I'm whipping them with human rights. You're bad. You're bad. And I'm trying to say to them, it's the opposite. Human rights are the good that you need to embrace, and you will make a better country through human rights, because it will result in more equality and less inequality and less stress for everyday people. I don't know if I'm winning that conversation, but I'm trying.
I think you are, but it's of course a step-by-step thing. And I always go back to what Saskia Sassen says in Push, that governments were richer 40 years ago and poorer today. And that shift in economical muscles has shifted over to the investors.
Yeah.
So they are sitting on a shitload of money. They can always invest. And politicians feel that they can't really do things that are needed for society without having these private sector in. So it's always public, private. That's how most politicians try to solve it. And I can understand it. But the problem is that they are kind of bringing the ugly wolf into the boat, you know. and in the end, he will eat you, you know. And this is what we see. And it keeps getting worse. And it is this kind of, I mean, as you stated in The Guardian, that student housing used to be affordable. A working class home used to be affordable. Yeah. You know, a workshop for a craftsman used to be affordable. You know, a lot of things were affordable and maybe not so fancy, but it was possible. But I mean, I was talking this morning at the coffee shop with my friend whose storage has been bought by Blackstone.
Yes. Yeah, that's another asset class for sure. It's so, if you have to think about how sickening it is, Fredrik. Blackstone invests in real estate, makes it so expensive for people. They get evicted. They need to store their things somewhere, so they store them in a Blackstone-owned storage facility.
But he said he just talked to his neighbor, and the neighbor said he's a carpenter. We have to move because Blackstone is doubling the rent.
Wow.
And of course, a carpenter can't really make that money, so he has to go. And this is the small business are being punished by that money that is floating around with the only ambition is to grow itself. They don't care about anything about our cities. They don't know in which cities they operate. They don't know anything about us. They only want to make those dollars, those zeros in bank accounts to be more. Yeah. Which is, how the fuck did we land in this? And it's not, I mean, you state this quite a lot, I mean, which I like. It's not even about capitalism or not. I mean, some people will argue it is, but can we have a capitalism then that would respect human rights and that respects the planet? Could we have some kind of rules that will apply for all, not only for us? Yeah. You know, that's what we need to go there. Yeah. So how, my friend? Can I vote for your party?
That's right. There is no party. Well, in Europe, you have parties who are trying to push better agendas. I think North America is really lost. I really feel that. Here's a small little story. It's always nice to tell little stories about the big picture. I went on Friday mornings. I I visit my father for breakfast, and he makes me a really nice Lebanese, we call it marjayoun breakfast because that's where he's originally from. And I noticed a piece of paper in a file that he had that was about his apartment. I pulled it out, and he was served with a letter from the landlord saying that they were going to increase his rent by 4.5%, which is above the legal limit. So we have a cap in the province where I live, and they were going to try to increase it by 4.5%. The cap is at 2.5%. So that would increase his rent by $1,000 a year. It was something, $80 or $90 a month, something like this. He's on a fixed income. My father is turning 89 this week. And, there's no reason to have an above guideline increase. His apartment, I would say, is in worse shape than it was last year. The air conditioner is broken. The balcony needs repair, all sorts of things. And he said, but not only have they are trying to increase my rent, they have increased the cost of laundry. They've increased the cost of parking. They made the lobby of the building nicer without asking us if that's what we needed. They replaced a carpet that didn't need replacing, et cetera, et cetera. And so here I am, an advocate, pushing back against, he lives in an apartment building owned by one of the largest landlords in Canada. And here it is, right on my doorstep, right? And what to do? Now, luckily, he has a tenant organization in his building. There's 3 buildings, and they've all been hit. He told me the story of meeting an older couple in the parking garage, and they said that they can't afford the rent increase, and they're going to have to give up their parking spot. That's the trade-off for them. But they're going to organize and push back. And I love this idea. Like, here's my father, almost 90 years old, and he is finding his inner fight because he has to stay in this apartment building. $1,000 a year for him is a lot. He's on a fixed income. He just has this government pension.
So we need to push back. I can tell you a story about here from Malmo. The company that you have been writing to about the Akelius company.
Ah, yes.
They've been shopping a lot of apartments around Sweden.
Ah, okay.
And in Germany and so on.
Oh, yeah.
And in good time, they sold off when the market was at its best. And the new owner was this Norwegian-Swedish called Heimstaden that are all now, they bought everything in the Czech Republic and Berlin and so on. But of course, they've been growing really quick. So, of course, they have a lot of loans. And now the rents are going up and the costs are going up. So in Sweden, we have this negotiated system where the landlords need to negotiate with the tenant organization. So the raise was 4%, but then, or maybe 5%, and then suddenly they said, no, we need 2% more, which is then kind of a breach of a 50, 60-year-long old Swedish tradition. And they just send out the invoices to the tenants. So now there is a big community, I think 30% of all these people who have got the increase that refuse to pay.
Right.
So they're paying the old rent. And it's a fight. It's really a fight, but the tenant organization is really on their side. So it's a very interesting fight. But it's basically Akelius sold something too expensive, and all that money they took away. That's really extractivism. They extracted wealth out of these houses, and then they moved out and they leave us nothing. So now the tenants, and of course these new landlords who bought it, they can't afford it because the loans are now getting very expensive. But it's not the tenants haven't done anything, and there is no real gain for them in all this shifting of landlords and so on. It's an interesting struggle, but it's also scary for a lot of people because there is nowhere
There's
to go.
nowhere to go.
You can't.
I have to say, I was in Toronto recently on a panel about a book written by someone who I'd love to have on this show, actually, a Brazilian-Canadian, Ricardo Tranjan, who's written a book called The Tenant Class, a really great book about financialization. He takes a Marxist approach. It's really super interesting. Anyway, there were a lot of tenant activists in the audience for the panel and on the panel. And the courage it takes to protest against rent increases, because if you go on a rent strike, which is what they do in Canada, where they just refuse to pay their rent, you can be evicted. That's a legal reason to be evicted, non-payment of rent. So they're really putting their lives and their homes on the line for justice, for human rights. I have so much admiration and respect. One of the things that you brought up, Fredrik, that I think is so interesting, people probably don't know, is what you said about the Swedish system. It's quite unusual, this negotiation between tenants and landlords to set the price for rents. And we're going to have on the podcast upcoming in October, I think, Mariana Mazzucato, one of the world's most renowned economists. And she and I have written a paper together, which we'll talk about on the podcast, but she has convinced me that there needs to be co-responsibility moving forward, that we need governments and the private sector and movements working together, and that's how we're going to solve all of this idea of co-responsibility. I really love it. And I noticed in Barcelona, they use that language when Mayor Colau was the mayor. She was talking very much about co-responsibility, governments, private sector, movements. And I think that's the way forward. I think that's a human rights approach, actually. But getting there is very difficult, as you demonstrated, right? So in Sweden, you have a history of co-responsibility. And like that, in one move, these very strong actors can change the game.
But they are getting some fights on their hands. It's an open and interesting game. It will probably land in court in some way, but it's interesting. Leilani, I think we have to go on. I'm going to Lund, the neighbor city here, to meet students to show the film, and then I'm going to Stockholm to also to show the film together with the young trade unionists.
Fantastic.
And then on and on. I will be. We had a podcast with Oxfam. I'm going to show the film in the Swedish Parliament together with Oxfam.
Great, fantastic.
Yeah, it's really cool. And for them, Oxfam, they think that the film is totally exactly what they want to talk about.
Great.
So the growing inequality, and of course the effect on the planet it also has. So it's. I'm really happy for that, and I hope I can work with Oxfam and other progressive organizations around the world.
Amazing.
And if you out there, dear listeners, want to know more about the film, you can find out through us. WGFilm.com or BreakingSocialFilm.com, PushTheFilm.com. And we have a lot of different entry points, but you can also find me, Fredrik Gerten, on different social media, and you can find Leilani at some places too. And now we are rolling season 7.
I'm heading off to Madrid next week to meet with the Greens. They're having a big policy debate and discussion, and I'm going to discuss housing with our friend from the European Parliament, Kim, and Van Sparentak.
Yeah, that's nice. Send her that's kind of interesting because Breaking Social was presented in the European Parliament now in July, together with the Greens of the European Parliament, and they are going to use my film in a campaign to claim that we need to tax the rich.
Fantastic.
It's time they also have to, give in and support the common good. It's enough with their tax evasion.
There is that group of is it billionaires who've come together?
There is in the US it's patriotic millionaires. In Europe it's called Millionaires for Humanity.
Okay.
I think it's interesting. I mean, also what we've been talking about a lot, Leilani, how the streets in North America and many other cities are flooded with homeless. It's walking around in a refugee camp in almost,
Absolutely.
In big cities. And I think a lot of people also with a lot of money feel that it's too much. It's not worth it, that they also want to have a society that is not that divided. I mean, I'm sure they want to have their wealth for themselves, but they still feel that they can contribute a little bit more than they do today.
You can't help but feel it everywhere you go in so many major cities, right? Our cities have become really... So you can just feel the inequality. It's so strong now. So I think that's really cool. I think it's amazing that your film is getting that kind of traction and being used that way to push for new policies and policies that will create greater equality. Go, 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 Fredrik.
And go, Leilani. So soon we will now start to produce news episode of this podcast, and it will be really interesting. Mariana Mazzucato, I'm really looking forward to
she's
talk to
amazing.
her.
She's a superstar. And she's amazing, and she's been so fun to work with. Our paper is getting quite a bit of interest, so we just need to keep pushing it. But I'm happy to talk with her, and we have some other cool guests lined up that we will be interviewing soon.
Good. So how do we want to tell people how we fund this podcast?
The fact that we don't fund the podcast, we continue to do it for free, but people could support it if they wanted to by simply going to patreon.com and looking up Pushback Talks, and they can give just a little bit of money, goes a long way.
And there are some people doing it, and you are our best friends. So big hearts out to our Patreon sponsors. You know who you are, and we love you deeply. Because whenever I see somebody coming in, it's like, wow, this is really cool. It
is cool,
and it makes us happy, and love is all we need. And some cash also sometimes.
Oh, I thought you were going to break out into song, the Beatles.
I could.
I won't.
But next time. Leilani, have a nice day over there in the Canada. And I will try to take care of Sweden. So, goodbye. Have a good day.
Nice to see you again, Fredrik. Nice to talk.
Ciao. Bye.
Bye.
Pushback Talks is produced by WG Film. To support the podcast, become a patron by going to patreon.com/pushbacktalks. Follow us on social media at make_the_shift and at push_the_film. Or check out our websites, maketheshift.org, pushthefilm.com, or breakingsocialfilm.com.